Welcome to Learning cEDH, the podcast dedicated to teaching you everything you need to know about competitive Commander. I'm your host, Matthew, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, Eric. And today, it's the big one. It's the big set we've all been waiting for. We've been talking about this since it first got announced, probably even before then, and that is Modern Horizons 3. You might have seen my tier list video going over some of the cards I think are most playable and where I expect to see them. That was a bit shorter and, just kind of going through them briefly. But here we're going to be talking about some of the bangers. We're going to be talking about the current state of cEDH, kind of what we're looking at going into MH3, and then going to be discussing what we expect to come in and shake things up. What decks might move up, what might move down. It's going to be absolutely impossible to predict everything because this is one of the craziest sets of all time, easily. But we're going to do our best, and we're going to talk about the cards we're excited about, cards that we expect to come up against, and everything in between.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited for this one. This one's going to be fun. Let's just say that's going to be pretty fun. Like, this is the first time that I think Matt and I got to do like a modern, like exclusive set that's like Modern Horizons or whatever, because the podcast didn't start until like after MH2 and everything, but here we are. We're back at it.
Yeah, and Lord of the Rings was impactful, but in like very small quantities of just like a couple cards here and there. And then even some of the stuff that was seeing play from that set has kind of fallen out of favor a little bit. But this set, I think, is going to be the opposite, where there's like, I don't know, 20, 30 plus cards just right off the bat that we see that look playable. And then it's just going to probably, that number just go up, I expect, and then fluctuate over time. And the more and more we get these kind of crazy sets, maybe the more of this kind of stuff is going to happen. But it's been really cool to just see a set that immediately looks to impact our format, because very often a set reveal or set release means absolutely nothing for cEDH.
Yeah, and you got to kind of scrape at the bottom of the barrel to like just to see, like, we've gotten sets before. Obviously, we'll take like Wilds of Eldraine, a standard set, and we saw like Agatha Soul Cauldron and then Beseech the Mirror. None of those broke our format wide open, but they were very impactful where they're played or just happened to be a good card. So
yeah, we saw a bit more with Thunder Junction, and it looks like in general we might be in like a new next era of power creep. It kind of feels that way, starting with Thunder Junction and then going straight to MH3 is just like, wow, just okay, we're just doing it. Even in the commander product, like we saw Stella Lee, just a super push commander that in a precon that costs 3 mana that goes infinite with like more than 30, maybe even 50 cards, something outrageous like that. And then we'll talk about Nadu today, of just like them clearly kind of changing their philosophy and what they're okay with putting on a cheap commander and what it's allowed to like interact with and combo with. But we'll get into that a little bit later. If you enjoyed this episode, like, comment, subscribe, tell us down below what you like about it, what cards you're most excited about MH3, what we get wrong, what we get right. We're probably going to, I had some people suggest we come back and reevaluate the cards like half a year later. So maybe our January update next year, we might do that and take a look at MH3 and kind of how it shook out. I think that'd be a lot of fun. Thank you to the Lemora's Cards patrons over there. Get access to early videos, cool stuff like that. I will say real quick too, this is a big summer for cEDH, both in releases and in our tournaments. You can catch us. I'll probably put a little graphic up here. I'm going to be at 2 10Ks hosted at CCS this summer. One next week, which is ran by Appalachian Gaming League, and then one at the very end of July ran by Beholder Gaming. That's part of a circuit that they're doing. And then also, you can't forget Cowtown, the big one leading up to the Invitational. Last chance to get your Platinum event win that Eric's gonna get here, so that's gonna be exciting.
I was as close could be. I'm like literally a fraction of away from like winning that last one, but that's okay. It was all fun and games and everything. And actually, as we pulled a little bit closer to that date, and I'll just wrap this up pretty quick, we've gotten more gold events that are just kind of like cropped up out of nowhere. They just announced July the 13th. I live in Tennessee, Columbia, having another big gold event. So I'll be at that one. So I'll be post Cowtown.
All right, I think with all that being said, we can go ahead and hop into it. Use the link in the description below to download Whatnot, and you'll get $15 to use to buy Magic singles, sealed product, get anything that you want, really. There's no limits. You just get $15 on the account for free just for signing up. This is one of the best ways you can support the channel, and again, it's just free stuff. Use the link in the description below. Give Whatnot a try. So I think what we're gonna do is start off with a bit of a recap of where we are right now, whatever you want to call it. Just briefly going through sort of the top decks of like the last quarter. So like we would do at a quarterly update, but really just skimming through, just give you perspective on where we're at the week before Modern Horizons 3 is legal. This is the last week of tournaments. We're recording this on June 1st, Saturday. There are events right now that'll be happening without MH3. Next weekend, MH3's legal.
All I did was a simple snapshot in time. We're going to just look at May. Just, we're not trying to go super in depth. These are just some of the things to look forward to and seeing how these cards might impact these kind of top performing decks as of late. And again, I never always suggest taking 1 month at a time to judge a deck on its performance, whether it's up or down. Just kind of look and see what's going on. But as we saw last year, how impactful that Lord of the Rings was, especially in that early beginning with like Orcish Bowmaster and all that type of stuff. And there was all these reactions to that card, whether it was too good, ubiquitous. People started cutting all their dorks out of their green decks and only ran so many. So we're just kind of give it time to flesh out. I'm going to start from the top and we'll go down to the bottom. And number one, it's Blue Farm. It's Tim Nakrom performing about 28 top 16s. And just for pure reference, this is 64 plus players.
There's also a plague, kind of unrelated to this, of unknown commander showing up on EDH top 16 that makes my job a nightmare. Sometimes it's the players using different sites other than Moxula or sites that aren't supported. Sometimes it's the tournament organizers just messing up and there's no deck list at all. And I literally just can't really cover your top 16 because there's like 2 decks that aren't even there. Come on now. What am I supposed to do with that? But when will it end? We miss a Rogthras that should be on here from my local friend Michael, who uses some other terrible website I don't even know the name of, and instead of Moxfield. And we should be at 5 with Rogthras. But anyway, second, we have cEDH. And this is I think the two. Like, if you're breaking this into a tier list, this is tier 1, is these 2 decks.
Yeah.
Like, the numbers drop from here is massive for top 16s, at least. 23 top 16s, 58 entries for a 39.66% conversion rate, which is really, really high. 42 less people than Tim Nakrom, but a really high conversion rate. I've noticed it in coverage lately. Every tournament I cover has like 2-3 cEDHs in the top 16. I'm trying to keep this brief, but I want to talk about this. These decks, like cEDH feeds on Tim Nakrom, I feel like, in a way where they kind of cycle. And we've talked about that. And then similarly with Magda, which we'll talk about soon, where if you have mid-range players sitting around drawing cards, cEDH and Magda sit around and they just get to activate and win the game. Like, their ability to sit around is a lot better. Tim Nakrom can push out early win attempts better than them. And you also see decks like Roxai and stuff like that do it too. But like, these decks are kind of tied together in what they do and how they shape the metagame. And they're kind of shaping it around them, kind of in a similar way that Kennen was previously, but now cEDH is like absolutely taking that spot.
Oh, for sure. And then like it's really interesting because you're gonna see like those types of decks that Matthew's talking about with like Blue Farm and whatnot. Like, they're good decks. Like, but then there's gonna be decks that kind of prey in those pods. I think another deck that just really exemplifies the whole like good stuff kind of deck and its colors is our number 3 one, which is just Tivit. 8 top 16s with 30 people playing for a 26.67% conversion rate. Still up there, still performing pretty high. But absolutely completely difference from 1 and 2, from 28, 23 to 8.
And then briefly touching on a couple, Magda is still on kind of its tear of just this crazy conversion rate of like around 40% that it's just been on like this year. Kind of similar to what I said with cEDH. And then one of the biggest shakeups probably period has been Kennen's drop in the past like really 6 months ish that it's been occurring, maybe a little bit before then. Down here at 5, 7 top 16s as well, but 53 entries for a 13% conversion rate. So the lowest on this list for the 3rd most popular deck in the format based on this as well.
4, 5, 6, and 7 are all tied with 7 top 16s. And Kenrith comes in at number 6 with 7 top 16s, 31 entries at a 22.58% conversion rate. But yeah, just another deck that deploys lots of creatures, that its creatures can start kind of doing the thing. The Kenrith itself can provide value.
Rockside, I think dropping in terms of the number here, but again, we have a bunch of these tied together, right? 7 top 16s, 22 entries, 31.82% conversion rate. So still a high conversion rate, just a little bit lower in popularity. Not the most popular deck at the moment, but it's still performing really well for the pilots who play it. Gets underneath those decks we were talking about. Najeela, similar-ish boat. There's a drop here where it's 5 top 16s, 14 entries, 35% conversion rate. Again, Najeela kind of showing up at that conversion rate, but at a way lower popularity than this was like this time last year, where this was looking at like the second most popular deck, potentially like right in there, usually in that top 3 range, like all throughout the year. Where Nagilas are kind of retooling. We see the mid-rangier ones. We see people bring in little bits of tech and lots of different approaches to Nagila now. I think there's a little bit more experimenting with it. One real standout that I'm a little surprised to see is Malcolm Timna back on the list, which it showed up like once, like early last year or something, where it was kind of popping off. And then had pretty terrible results, like genuinely really bad results for the rest of the year. But 4 top 16s, 11 entries, 36.36% conversion rate. This one snuck up on me because I don't think I've covered an event that had a Malcolm Timna, but it's showing up.
We're not doing like a super deep dive on this today with these, so I don't know who the pilots are. I don't know if it's like the specialists have some free time and they're actually coming back and playing the deck. You know what I mean? Because you see that quite often. You'll see certain specialists of decks, they'll do well, and then it kind of almost rejuvenates like the interest back into the list. So I'd have to take a little bit deeper dive look into that. But I'm going to let you cover number 10 since that is one of your new babies.
Yeah, number 10 is Rogthras, which is it's missing one. Stupid internet. 4 and 11. Should be 5 and 11, whatever. So again, 36.36% conversion rate, which is really cool to think about, even if it's not on the website or whatever, that it would be like tied with Nagila and have a better conversion rate if the numbers were correct, which some of these other decks might be missing. Some, like I've been saying, the unknown commander thing is just a problem. This is a newer deck that kind of took off this year. Really, where like people have talked about it before and it's had other archetypes and success as like a polymorph deck. The new really Teamer Turbo variant of it, the creature heavy Cradle combo deck, is just an archetype like we talked about this year, is just something that probably is here to stay. It has a lot of new cards out of MH3 that look very exciting and powerful. At least of the decks that I play, I'm familiar with, probably one of the biggest winners of this set from what I can tell. Powerful, really fun, awesome deck that is still getting cleaned up. I wouldn't be surprised if this thing got top 5 here at some point. And then there's one that you've played a little bit on the list as well. That's tied here for 4.
Corval, the Fey Curse King, with 4 wins, tied with 11, 10, and 9. Yeah, 17 entries with a 4 top 16s with a 23.53% conversion rate. I'd say since Punt City 3, the interest level of Corval has increased quite a bit and shows that it can be in these tournaments competing with the best decks in the format as long as you understand how to play the list. And it's really nice to see that there's other people playing it at 64 plus player events. That's awesome. That's really cool. Another deck that I feel like is a massive winner of MH3.
I really like to think of the metagame right now as being the 3 archetypes being traditional mid-range, which looking at these decks would be Timnacrom, Tivit, Kenrith to an extent, Nagila depending on the build, and Malcolm Timna. And then like inevitability engines is what I kind of like to think of as decks like Sisay, Magda, and Kennen. Specifically Sisay and Magda, because their thing will just win the game. They just if they get to press the button on their commanders, it will find a way to win the game. Kennen's a little bit more value generaty, but he's also like really easy to combo with. You just get the Basalt Monolith. So he kind of toes the line. And then just like broken enablers, which Nagila can be. The 5-color Rogside builds, we're looking at Nagila like that as like, here's my SWAT, whatever enabler. But specifically, the Rog decks, it's just Rog is being arguably the best enabler of broken stuff in the format. And then Corvold being a huge storm enabler and potential like combo outlet, or really just works at every side of a combo that you want to do in that deck. And that, for the most part, covers a lot of what we see in successful decks.
I think we're ready to just kind of jump in to see how these cards are going to affect some of these decks that we just talked about.
Welcome to TopDeck.gg, your community's home for everything competitive Magic has to offer. Whether you're hosting an event, playing for a huge prize, or trying to advertise your store to thousands of players, we've got you covered. Using intuitive pairing software, playing Magic is a breeze. All your players have to do is sign up online, then scan the QR code in-store. Give your competitors the gift of perfect information as their bracket updates in real time. Then, when the match is decided, our self-reporting software saves you time and leaves paper match slips in the past. Leave the heavy lifting to us so your community can sit back, relax, and have a great day of playing Magic. One thing, I guess, before even looking at a specific card, maybe we could do like a little, just like a take or two on what we think broadly the format, there's like a takeaway from this set. For me, one thing I've noticed making the tier list, talking about this set a lot, and being for a decent bit like a blue farm main, is that they didn't get like a single card out of this set. I think they got one that we'll talk about. Looking at the list, one that I think like slots in cleanly without like, you can just throw it in and you're probably happy with it. But I think the rest are much more niche and they're going to be like way more pilot dependent. And that like 2-3 slots extra that you can swap things in TNK. They definitely didn't get a slam dunk Esper Sentinel level staple.
Yeah, finally.
It took a while. It took a while. They didn't get a staple.
I think what this set really shows for me, and we're gonna mostly be talking about like the cards. We're not gonna like talk about a lot of the commanders that could potentially be. We're not covering the commander decks. So this is typically what we're going to be talking about. So there's some gems in the commander decks I think is going to be pretty interesting. I think it takes people who really want to brew like in there. I think could be like a really cool 5-color Eldrazi cEDH list. I don't know. I'm going to leave that up to somebody else. But in reality, what I want to talk about is just like, I think a lot of decks got new tools. And cEDH, for the most part, with all these decks, like I know like Rogthras is still like evolving, decks getting cleaned up, how many of these like kind of quirky combo enablers you need, how much of the layering like stuff do you need? Do you just need like 2 to 3 clean outlets, that type of stuff? And I just think that what this set does, it cleans up a lot and helps reinforce a lot of these strategies that we're playing a little bit better. And again, we get some new tools and we also get some cards that we typically don't see. So it's going to be quite interesting. I know I've been testing a bunch of these cards, specifically in Corvold. I'd say a list of anywhere from 6 to 8 different cards I've slotted in and out of the list so far, which is a massive number to test.
Yes.
Like, that is a big deal. Like last year, it was like, do I play the One Ring and Orcish Bowmaster? You know, it was kind of like that deal. Now it's like, I don't even know if those cards are even make it half the time. You know what I mean? Like they're still good cards. There's probably never right or wrong way to put them in your deck, but
yeah,
is it like, are they even needed? You know what I mean? And like these kind of cards that we'll see and we'll go over specifically for different archetypes could be pretty good. And they might ultimately, they could end up, you know, being poo-poo. We don't know, but it's fun to always speculate.
It doesn't feel like things necessarily, for our format at least, got power crept out. It's more like your options just increased a lot is the vibe that I'm getting from a lot of these cards. Like,
yeah,
a lot of the ones that we're going to talk about didn't really have an equivalent. It wasn't like, oh, I can cleanly swap this out for this because this is a better version of it. Like, they're just new types of things. I mean, one of the most clean thing was like we got a worse Necropotence. So they certainly weren't going to power creep that card. For the most part, I think it is like you just have way more options and the slots just got tighter is the main takeaway here. And green got better. Also, I think that's a big one too. Is green got good cards in the Spawn Horizon set. We've done it.
Yeah, we still didn't get our green Esper Sentinel like level card or green Ragavan or anything like that, which would have been super, super sweet. But there are 2 cards specifically, I would say, that are like cEDH playable cards that are played that got a massive upgrade. And we'll go over the cards that are connected with them, but it's Crop Rotation and Entomb-like effects.
Let's start with the hot stuff. Okay.
Yeah.
Flare of Duplication. This was one of the ones that it got leaked very early. In one of the worst looking leaks ever, so people weren't sure if it was real. All the ROG pilots were like hyped out of their minds because that's the thing that jumps off the page right at you, right? Is hey, I have a 0 mana red guy lying around. I can sacrifice him for this card. But yeah, 1 red, you may sacrifice a non-token red creature rather than pay the spell's mana cost. Copy target instant or sorcery spell. You can change targets for the copy. Compared to things like SWAT and Fierce, which is this and the other flares will get compared to, the deck building requirements are certainly like way tighter than something like that. Like Deflecting SWAT was just like, well, do you want to cast your commander at some point? I mean, especially early on, you run Deflecting SWAT. That was about it. Flare of Duplication certainly requires more, but its synergy with Roger is inherently unbelievably broken. Just having that online, it is a little bit, we've talked about and you've talked about it like off camera, maybe on camera too. Like there's tension in Rock size specifically with the card, because they have like a million different ways they sacrifice him. And people just kill their Roger in general if they get the chance to do it freely, especially with the Bowmaster. The other part of it, which comes up in the deck too, of like, I've got a flail on this guy. I've got a Paradise Mantle on him. I've got whatever. And like, I don't want him gone. I kind of want him to stick around. That's the tension with this. Rogthras dodges that really well for the most part. A deck like Magda, they just got a bunch of stupid little dwarves out there. Any single dwarf in play for Magda represents copy your Nas, copy your Fierce, copy your Intuition, whatever they might want to copy. It's pretty cracked. Really powerful card. That's like the first, I think, super playable fork variant that we've seen really for the format. I know people were testing the Thunder Junction one.
With Flare Duplication, and I think Magda is actually the biggest like upgrade. That's the biggest upgrade for Magda. It's going to be Flare. I think Flare is more impactful than Magda, than it is in ROG, because all the ROG decks are already typically like Temur or Grixis. They already have counter spells. So it's just another good card in their deck, potentially, where like Magda does not have this ability outside of Deflecting Swat. Now they have like 2 free interactive things. And I see people compare this to Deflecting Swat. It is not a Deflecting Swat. It is a fork effect. So it does not operate in the same way as protection as the Deflecting Swat can be. Like if someone goes to play a removal spell on your commander or anything like that, you don't get to like bounce it back. You get to copy it. Like, so just keep that in mind, you know, and I get it because it's 3 mana, it's red, it's free. I've gotten where people like ask me like, are you going to play this in Corvold? And I'm just like, I don't know the scenario in which I could.
Yeah.
Because Deflecting Swat is already a card to ask to play in that deck. It's still very good because the turns you're going off, typically you have like your big 5 mana commander in play. But I don't want to sack my commander to copy a thing, especially too, I typically need it out. So I don't know if it fits that slot. I run Dockside Extortionist, but Dockside's getting sacrificed to typically cost effects.
Yeah.
So Dockside's not going to be on the battlefield inherently when I need the flare. So I don't think flare makes a cut. Could it probably make the cut? Its power level is certainly high enough that it's considerable for sure. It's a card that I am testing. It has literally come up 0 times, like in gameplay or like something else wouldn't have just been just as fine. So I'm not really sure. But for like ROG decks and Magda specifically, and I'm sure like even something like, again, it's the same thing. Like does Najeela want to sacrifice itself for this card if it's maybe more of the ROG side build of Najeela? But then when you do that, you also cut off your Fierce and your Deflecting Swat and your Deadly Rollick. So there's the tension. That's what like I think people are kind of missing on this card is that, you know, you have 3 other cards that operate on having your 0 mana commander out. You're also sacrificed. So you can't just go jam it in there, still also play all the other sacrifice effects. I think there needs to be some give on that. Like you gotta go off something.
I don't think there's another Sans Black Roger deck that has anything going for it that I know of, but I guess going forward, if you had some kind of Sans Black Roger build, I like it there specifically. And then specifically also with Thrasios being so cheap, a lot of times you're not turning off Fierce to do this or SWAT. Yeah. Also, I really like the medium case scenario of this being turn 1, ROG, whatever, pass. Someone Demonic Tutors, copy it. Just get my own DT in my Temur deck. I'll sacrifice Roger for it. Just getting an instant speed Diabolic Intent basically for free as like a not insane thing to copy, but just a good one. We don't get Vamp Tutor and Lighten Tutor in this decks. Usually that stuff is a little bit tighter. And then also that deck does have like Imp Recruiters and stuff sometimes lying around, not necessarily all the time, but it's definitely a powerful card. Doesn't make sense in every deck, but I think that's the general theme of this set. This set is filled with really strong cards that let you do a lot, that don't necessarily power creep other cards, and don't necessarily go in every single deck.
Also probably really good in Atali, right? Because Atali has, again, like the recruiter kind of cards laying around. They're on stuff like Orcish Lumberjack. Yeah, you know, getting
Atali back in the zone is actually an upside if you whiffed on clones and you just refire with like an ogre, or you hit a J-Will or something, just make mana, refire it. Kind of a niche upside again in ROG Thras of like, oh, I don't have a way to start my Cloudstone thing, but I could sack Roger to protect the Cloudstone to then have a creature in the yard to start the Cloudstone or have a creature in the zone. That's kind of more niche, getting lost in the sauce, but those scenarios come up a lot with that deck. But yeah, this is just gonna be a card you just gotta play it and see how it shapes up in your deck if it makes sense for you. And the next card we're gonna talk about, really exciting one that's super sick, is 6. That's the name. It's just 6. 2 and a green, legendary creature, Tree Folk. It's a 2/4. Good luck bowmastering that. Reach. Whenever 6 attacks, mill 4 cards, you may put a land card from among them into your hands. As long as it's your turn, non-land permanent cards in your graveyard have retrace, meaning that you may discard a land to cast them from your graveyard.
Just a small quick edit. I think it's mill 3 cards, right?
Oh, what did I say? It is 3.
You said 4.
Oh, no, yeah, it's 3.
I was like, I hope I read
it.
No,
it's 3. It's 3. Yeah, I'm looking at my tier list image for this, so I'm like basically just using the words to remind me of the actual words. I have to bring up the images for some of these.
It's mill 10, you know?
Yeah, let's do it.
It should just have been mill 6.
I immediately had someone confused because they thought it milled on ETB, and I was like, nope, it's not that broken. I wish it did.
Should have.
Wish it did, but it doesn't. So what are your thoughts on 6?
I was really hyped about this card when I first saw it, mostly because it's a really cool card, right? Like it's pretty awesome. So I was framing it in the context of like Corvold. There's not a lot of cards that fit into Corvold, like in terms of the cEDH builds, because like typically that deck wants to do a certain thing. It doesn't want to necessarily have a bunch of generically good cards in it, which doesn't make those cards wrong. Like we've seen cards come in and out of the list over the years for myself, other players, like things like Doughty Voidwalker, Opposition Agent, Orcish Bowmaster. So basically, whichever way your deck is built and designed to, there's like kind of those filler, just ubiquitously good cards that kind of fit in those slots. They're not right or wrong. I don't think there's no such thing when it comes to cards of that power level, but whether you want your deck to consistently perform a certain way, or do you want to have that like hedge case scenario where you can like protect yourself or kind of get into the game if you're kind of pushed out, or get somebody with something like an Oppo. So 6 fills a unique role. So 6 is like that value kind of card that we talked about. It's super easy to cast. It's kind of hard to kill as being an X4. It also has reach, which is not nothing. It's the ability to convert your lands during a storm turn into basically more material, which is something like we've talked about for Corvold is like really, really good. Really, the only way Corvold beats itself during a storm turn is if it just draws lands, and it has no way to like continue the thing. Even though 1 black draw 5 is typically very good, it doesn't inherently mean you're going to hit another chain effect. And this just kind of solidifies that. This protects basically all your win conditions, because one of the things that specifically I started in PC3 that other players have adopted is going pure permanent based as your win con, whether it's a combo piece or it's your actual card that wins you the game. So we've got rid of things like Wither Chain, Dual Caster Mage, because they just lose to everything, even though I think Wither Chain's still a really good compact A+B and the like a faster build. But you know, things like obviously we know Ruthless Technomancer, it's very good. Underworld Breach, Grinding Station, permanent based. You've got Food Chain Squee, another permanent based effect, like, and then obviously Mayhem Devil, and just the ability to retrace, like cast your defense grid, it gets countered, cool, replay it. You know, like, you know, things like that. Docent, it replays your reanimation spells, or rather the reanimation enchantments like Animate Dead. Obviously you get back Underworld Breach. It's a really, really powerful card in the respect of like it has a commander that also feeds the lands that it needs, and it's just a really good turn 1 play that allows you to basically progress, because if you're playing on turn 1, you're probably got some kind of fast mana. So it insulates you against from the flooding out thing, something to do if you flood, or it also allows you to get into your lands. So it's it kind of just fits all those roles. Like I really do like it. And it happens to be a pseudo combo piece with like Skirt Prospector or Mayhem Devil with Dockside, because you're going to like, you know, play your Dockside, crack your treasures, draw some cards, whether sack it to the Skirk or pew it with the Mayhem Devil. And then you're going to probably hit on a probability of 4 to 6 cards you're drawing. You're going to hit a land. You just pitch a land, recast the Dockside, and then you just continue. So it's a card that bridges and smooths out your lines. That's why I really like it. It also insulates you against, you know, your combo pieces or your draw engines, whatever that looks like, dying. If someone counters your Necro, you can just replay it. Things like that. I can't really say enough about this card. We're really testing it right now. And Matt, I know you've been playing with it. What do you notice so far?
It's a really interesting like you said, it's not really a combo card inherently, but it can be because of just the ability to recur your stuff. Like again, it's not really great for like Thoracle Consult kind of stuff, because usually the part of that that's interacted with is the part that you can't do anything with 6. But if you're doing like Cloudstone Curio Dockside, Cannon Basalt Monolith, Devoted Druid Machine God's Effigy, any of the permanent based stuff in Rock, like literally all of them in Rogthras are, but like a lot of other decks too. I mean, potentially even if you did like Divining Witch, you know, Thoracle, stuff like that, or you're doing the kind of Feed Artisan build. We talked about this kind of off beforehand, where I think this plus another few other things like kind of cleans up some green issues, and just this card in general is one of those cards that does so much. You can find some synergy that seems broken for your deck. Simple ones that I saw just in a game are, hey, I have a handful of lands. I had a game where I went like turn 1, the One Ring, and then turn 2, 6. Use 6 to turn my hand of lands into Lotus Petals to power out like Thrasios and whatever, end on a petal. And then I think I got Twistered. Was very happy I ended with Lotus Petal in play because of that Twister. I untapped and it was just like, how do like having a win con, like I had Cloudstone Dockside, I got wheeled into those. Having that and then 6 in play, I didn't even really need interaction. I had some, but I was able to just keep trying the stuff, and then if they had an answer to it, I just like throw away a land, try it again. The Lotus Petal synergy is obviously powerful if you have enough lands for it, but also the ability for it to be like a proactive engine. I told Eric earlier, it's kind of like proactive Eternal Witness, where I can just throw it down on turn 1 or 2, whatever, swing with it, mill over something. You can either hit me a land and get me one to hand. That part is sick. The fact that it mills and gets you a land, so if you mill, hit a creature or something you want, it gets you the land to cast the creature. Like, it might as well have just put the creature in your hand if that happens. Plus, you could just use it to hit your land drop and sit on that card in the yard. Like if there's a whatever, if you're on defense grid or Dosin, whatever, Dosin can sit in your yard and then you get to your turn, boop, it happens. Notable thing with Retrace 2 is you put the spell on the stack. So they have to, if they want to like Noxious you or something or somehow interact with your graveyard, we had a situation come up with Agatha's Soul Cauldron. Like immediately the first game I played this, they have to Soul Cauldron your thing before you go to cast it, because once you've retraced, that's just part of the casting. And it's on the stack. So they have to do it some point where you don't have priority to cast the thing where the stack isn't clear or something like that. He's just nuts. There's just so many good permanents. I will say if you're not on, if you're on the one that's really low land counts, maybe, or your combos don't line up with it, maybe it doesn't work. But it's hard to imagine a green deck where this isn't at least a consideration, just because of the nature of a lot of those decks. Like a lot of them win with Kin and Basalt. Just there's so much you can do. And like Eric said, they got and the body's good. The 2/4 is really relevant. If this thing was a 2/1, we're talking like a whole different story on how your ability to actually use this thing on a turn where people are trying to stop you. Things with 1 toughness don't survive those turns usually.
Yeah, it's a banger. And one thing about 6 that, we didn't even touch on its actual combo potential with things like Life from the Loam.
Yeah.
Obviously that's something to be considering. It does some kind of cool stuff. Now Gitrog loves this card, right? So we're not even talking about in its like most obvious applications in like a deck like Gitrog. There's green decks that are utilizing LED and Groundskeeper. It's the one that's like 2 mana, return a land to your hand. It creates a green Bomberman combo. Yeah. Effectively. So you're netting 1 mana every time. So you got a green Bomberman combo, which is really cool. It just does a lot of the things that it can do. And again, being a 2/4, having reach, also being a single green. If this was double green, I don't know if I would I know it sounds kind of silly.
It's actually way
different. If your deck is looking for the ability to continuously to have that, button where it wants to keep pushing forward, or it's trying to present a lot of wins, like especially if it's a proactive deck, I would definitely suggest giving 6 a try. It's a pretty cool card.
Kind of already between it and this next card we're going to talk about, it's made construction on decks that I have built like Rogthras, where I don't really use my graveyard that much, made me think about okay, maybe I just want to now, and change the construction to where maybe instead of Twister I want to run Wheel of Fortune, or maybe even go up on Misfortune as well if I wanted to double up on that effect, or Windfall instead. And talk about green having a good way to use Intuition as well in the the Sans white green piles that could be Breach or could be some other graveyard based thing with 6. And this next card we're going to talk about, Shifting Woodland. We have a lot of options with your green graveyard deck.
All right, the next card we're going to talk about is a land. Shifting Woodland enters the battlefield tapped unless you control a forest. It taps for a green, and it has this ability, Delirium. 2 colorless, double green, Shifting Woodland becomes a copy of target permanent in your graveyard until end of turn. Activate only if there are 4 or more card types among cards in your graveyard. This card's unplayable, right, Matt?
Yeah, it could enter tapped one day. So, unfortunately, you know what I think about lands that could enter tapped but are otherwise broken. You got to throw them in the trash.
What if this is just the new meta? Just lands that
we're just the tap land meta, bro.
Shifting Woodland is a card that I had to read it twice over because Matthew sent it to me, and I was like, oh, dude, it's gonna I literally immediately thought it had to tap to activate its ability, and I was like, yeah, I mean, I could see it, but it's still no, it can tap itself to pay for its own ability. I couldn't go down the applications of this card because there's a lot. I mean, there's a tremendous amount. The way I look at it is a lot of decks in cEDH, 3-color plus, there's always a bunch of rando gold lands that people play, whether it's an Exotic Orchard or Forbidden Orchard, those kind of cards. It's just kind of maybe the best-ish thing to do, but you're never really excited to play those kind of cards. I just cut Exotic Orchard and just put this card in Corvold, because at the beginning of the episode, we were talking about Entomb effects, and then Crop Rotation they got a massive stock increase in this set. And I think this is one of those cards because it happens to work with both very well. well. Entomb, putting 2 card types in your graveyard, an instant and a permanent for this card specifically, and Crop Rot doing the same thing. It could become like your Grand Abolisher effect. It could also become Underworld Breach. It could become a combo piece that's in your graveyard. Obviously, this does not work with ETBs, so you take that into consideration, but it could easily become an Emil. Now, if you want to get really spicy, it could become a Dockside, then you copy the Dockside, but we're not going to talk about that. But by the way, works really well with 6, because 6 is milling in the graveyard. 6 can also get it. Great job, design team, on this one. Big fan of this choice. It's been really impressive in testing. Matt, what clean up my convoluted ramble for me.
Couple things just to note about how the card works. Inner's tapped unless you have a forest, but especially in 3 colors or less green decks, that starts to become way less of a thing. So all the stuff with its activations, like Eric said, it does not work with ETBs. Like you can't use it on a Dockside because the land didn't enter. It's already in play. That doesn't work. It has the Delirium restriction for card types, but it has no other restrictions. So like Eric mentioned, it can tap itself to activate. There's no other restriction, which is what's kind of mind-boggling. There's no once per turn. There's no activate only as a sorcery. There's no activate only on your turn. You don't even exile the thing from the yard. It just stays in the yard. You can keep refiring on the same permanent every turn. So you can sit with this thing in play with anything in your yard really that might come up during a turn and then just bring it back. Like somebody can kill your Oppo tutor, turn this into Oppo, or turn this into a Ristic or Mystic that got destroyed of yours. Like anything that might affect the game, you can use and put this on it and then get back to your turn and use it on something else or use it on the same thing again. Really wild. There isn't really an effect like this. Like there's no card that really does what this card does. Like I mentioned before, there's kind of been more talk of like, is this an intuition green pile now we have with like 6 plus this breach, whatever. If they put breach in the yard, you can turn the land into it, or you can, use 6, discard a land, buy back the breach. So there's a lot of overlapping stuff, like Eric mentioned with that. Just a strong card with any graveyard centric thing, the entombs, the intuitions, wheels, whatever. It's just a crazy card. It's really just the kind of effect that you read it and you're just like, does this work how I want it to? Like similar to 6, the cards that are good with 6 are kind of good with this, right? If I would need to refire Basalt Monolith, Kinnan, Cloudstone, doesn't really work if like I cast the Cloudstone and then I cast Dockside and then counter Dockside. There's not likely a favorable way to do that unless you have a clone in hand, and then we can kind of make it work. The best part of it, again, like Eric was saying, what did he have to cut for it? Exotic Orchard. Cut the worst land in your deck for this. Crop Rot stocks continue to go up, continues to just be a better and better Magic card. Kind of just a cracked card. And again, the cost of entry, there's just nothing. It's an untapped land probably.
It creates lines that are already kind of in a lot of these decks.
Yeah.
But what it does is it insulates you against, again, removal and counter Magic. And that's why it's really, really impactful. It's not like I'm necessarily going to proactively go get this and then entomb something in the graveyard. I might. I've been testing it with Bolas the Citadel, for example, which is disgusting if you do that. But I'm also enjoying Vexing Bauble over Bolas the Citadel as a card that's like letting me push through wins. For a card like this, it's just really interesting to have that ability to go for something maybe a little bit earlier than you normally wouldn't, because you have this in your back pocket, whether it's in your hand or you have access to it. Also, it's a very scary land on the battlefield. Now, anything that would like an intuition is probably a must counterable card, right? Like it's very scary. And also typically intuition, not a card you see in these decks. Not saying that's going to go into it, but same thing for me. If I'm developing out and then turn 3, I cast Entomb, you probably got to counter this card. If I have access to Delirium, it could go become a food chain.
Because even the fear of it in your hand of like, oh, well, I can just counter the Reanimate with his Entomb or whatever. And then if you just go land drop for turn, I now have a food chain in play, exile my whatever. Like that totally changes the math on like, oh, don't counter the tutor. Suddenly it's like, okay, we probably have to interact with the tutor because there's a potential that he just has a way to bring it back that we can't even deal with. This card does get hit by Deflecting Swat, but that's like it. That's in terms of interaction. There's not much else that affects this card. Potentially Noxious Revival and like Endurance.
Play with it, experiment with it. I know some 60 card players, they're going to really play with it. It does some pretty cool stuff with the One Ring. So you just like make it the One Ring, draw a card, it gets a burden counter.
Yeah,
so
the fact that it keeps the counters, but you don't take the damage is so cool.
Yeah, and that might be something too that it comes up in like these in these decks that are big mana decks that just happens to have their one wing in their graveyard and they just have tons of mana like laying around. They're just going to be able to activate it and stuff like that, especially
Well,
if you're
yeah.
like a Seaborn Muse.
Or again, like Kinnan tries to like power out something and they just counter it, and it's just like I have Hullbreaker Horror in my graveyard at any point to just like click like
yeah.
that's really gross.
Oh my god, I forgot about that.
Yeah.
Forgot about that. That's pretty gross right there. Just oh yeah, darn, I'm a con sphinx, whatever. It's the applications are there and the cost for entry is very low if your deck can support it.
Yeah, so a couple cards that are like less exciting, potentially, like you'll see them a decent amount or they're a consideration for your deck building. Galvanic Discharge is essentially like energy lightning bolt. 1 red instant, choose target creature or planeswalker. You get 3 energy counters, and then you can pay any amount of energy to have it deal that much damage to the chosen target. For the purposes of like removing creatures, it's essentially just lightning bolt. Can't hit players notably. A reason that I was kind of like not necessarily like super hyped to run it, but just like kind of think it's an interesting thing to run in your decks is for the ability to, if you're doing any other energy stuff, we'll talk about a couple other energy cards. It's potentially just bolt with upside. The downside is if you're looping lightning bolts to as a win condition, this can't do that. But then also just like if you bolt something and then you get any way to get this back, right? Anytime you might want to like escape it with Underworld Breach, recast bolt, kill 2 things. You could do something like Galvanic your opposition agent, use 2 energy. I have an energy lying around, escape it, Galvanic your Talion. Something like that, because you can split the damage up as you net energy. So there's some cool application for it. I think it gets the most interest out of lower color decks that are high on this kind of effect, and maybe recursion, like an Obnixilis, really big on removing the stack pieces that hate them out of the game. That also might be running. There's a couple like energy cards I talked about in Ob, like the Unstable Amulet that nets energy. Wheel of Potential could be more of a consideration. So there's a big energy package in MH3 that you don't necessarily have to run all of it or build an energy deck. But if you start adding a card or 2, some of these other ones start to become more interesting. The other energy card, I guess we can go ahead and lump this in, that I specifically want to talk about is Static Prison. That is probably just really, really good in general. You can ignore the energy thing on it, and it's just a really strong card. Anything you want to say about Discharge before moving to this card?
Yeah, I think it's just a really solid card. If like Matthew said, if you're running Lightning Bolt as a removal spell, like I keep hearing like, well, but you can't hit a Naz or a Necro player. I'm like, I'm playing Corvold, man. I'm not hitting a Naz or a Necro player.
If I'm at that point, things have gone way out of control. Things have gotten really bad.
And that happens so often where people like have like maybe the one instance that's happened, right? Like where you just got them. I'm not about trying to get them. I'm trying to win. There's a complete difference in getting somebody and just actively trying to win the game. And this card, for the context of what Matthew's talking about of removing a creature, it is strictly better than Bolt. Like in removing creatures. Now, if you're an Eternal Witness loop deck, keep your Bolt. You need that because that's a way to win the game. And especially too, but like for something like, we'll say Corvold, is it probably better than Lightning Bolt? Yeah, probably. And it's competing with like Bolt, Rending Volley, Fatal Push, those kind of cards, So I think they're all kind of very similar. This one has a little bit of upside. I don't play Bolt right now, but it could be in that slot because we've got other energy cards we'll talk about. I'm surprised you didn't even mention the blue energy Flapper Drake with this card.
Yeah, because I think that one is the one where
it's just standalone good.
Well, it's standalone good, but also it does get a decent bit of upside from having more energy cards lying around.
Yeah.
Because like Volatile Stormdrake is 1 in a blue, 3/2, flying, hexproof from activated and triggered abilities, which I don't know if any other card has that line of text on it. And then it has, when it enters the battlefield, exchange control of Volatile Stormdrake with target creature and opponent controls, period. That's like one effect it has. And then if you do, you gain 4 energy, and then you can pay energy equal to that creature's mana value. And if you don't, that creature's sacrificed. Kind of sounds like a lot of text for basically play Gilded Drake, new Gilded Drake, Energy Drake, do the exchange, you get 4 energy. And if the creature was, say, an opposition agent, you can pay 3 energy and you keep that opposition agent. The new part of the card is that if I did that on a Crom, if I don't have the energy, I don't get to keep the Crom. The Crom just dies. But the cool part of the card is if I use this on a Collector Oof and I get 4 energy and I say, I don't want to pay the energy, the Collector Oof just dies. And this was a 2 mana blue creature that just destroyed target Collector Oof when it entered the battlefield, which is a flexibility that Gilded Drake doesn't have of there's something symmetrical in play I don't want there. Let's get rid of it. So there's upside and downside to this card. And it gets better when you have energy. You have, if you just like, like I thought about like if I'm kind of playing a team or pile, right? I could swap out Discharge for Bolt, put in Volatile Stormdrake over Gilded Drake if I hadn't just bought a Japanese one and was wanting to run that. Maybe we're probably not going to go too much into like Wheel of Potential, but there's enough cards to where the upside on some of them is high enough to where you might just run like 2 or 3 of these cards. Just as like the overlap is there. I'm okay with the floor of Volatile Stormdrake as it is. And then sometimes if I Galvanic Discharge something, I might be able to take a Crom instead of killing it with the Stormdrake. But probably the card that gets the most bang for your buck for an energy is Static Prison.
All right, so Static Prison is an enchantment for 1 white. When Static Prison enters the battlefield, exile target non-land permanent an opponent controls. Until Static Prison leaves the battlefield, you get 2 energy. At the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, sacrifice Static Prison unless you pay 1 energy. Yeah, it's 1 white, exile non-land permanent. Yeah, it's pretty good.
Yeah, it's most compared, I think, to Leyline Binding. Leyline Binding is technically 6 mana, but has Domain to make it cheaper. So in a lot of formats, if you have Domain active, you got all the land types, you spend 1 mana at instant speed to just exile a thing until it leaves. This is sorcery speed, which is you're definitely relevant. It would be pretty busted actually if it was instant speed. But as it is, this is the best sorcery speed removal I think in the format. The way it plays out with the energy is I play it. The turn I play it, your thing is gone. The next turn, I go down 1 energy, your thing is still gone. The next turn, I go down 1 more energy, your thing is still gone. And then the third turn, finally, your thing gets to come back, which is a very long time in cEDH. If you bounce this card and I haven't paid all my energy, if I've stockpiled any energy, the next thing I exile is staying gone even longer.
Yeah, I think its most comparable like card would be like Portable Hole. Portable Hole sees some play. It's a very good card. I'd love to have a type of card that could like hit, kind of any non-land permanent ubiquitously. So that's pretty good. Yeah, I think this card's pretty good. I think it just basically you just play at the turn like you're trying to like take something out to whether it's like a Stacks piece, a Ristic Study. And the fact that it's not like capped at like a mana cost is kind of wild.
Yeah, being able to hit anything of any mana value, any type, whatever, just non-land. And then it takes 3 turns to get it back. Pretty good. Not really an effect. We have something similar to it, this mana value at least.
It's just another flexible removal piece. It allows your Enlightened Tutor to go get a piece of removal that's not capped out like at a mana cost like Portable Hole is. So I think it's pretty good.
Probably our last energy card we want to talk about. This one is a little more Corvold centric in our discussion maybe. And that is Chthonian Nightmare. 1 and a black. Enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, you get 3 energy. So that is an ETB. Keep that in mind compared to Recurring Nightmare. You can pay X energy, sacrifice a creature, and return Chthonian Nightmare to its owner's hand. Return target creature a card with mana value X from your graveyard to the battlefield. Activate only as a sorcery. Very similar to Recurring Nightmare, reserve list card that this kind of cycle is about. They had Gilded Drake and Chthonian Nightmare. For the purpose of just pure looping, ignoring the ability to interact, and for doing dockside combo loops, this is arguably like an upgrade on Recurring Nightmare. It's a full mana cheaper. You're not usually looping creatures that cost a whole lot of mana. It's like dockside and other cheap creature to begin with. And if you're doing that, this is better beyond that ETB that happens that gives people a little bit of time to interact with the thing versus Recurring Nightmare, which was pretty much untouchable by disenchant effects. But those aren't really a thing in this format. It's kind of a thing with this card, right? Like the main thing that would hit this in most decks is a bounce spell. Those aren't really good answers to this card.
Yeah, and the most bounce spell that sees play that could hit this is Chain of Vapor. I'm not really like, you got me.
Yeah.
Darn, you bounce this card with the Chain of Vapor. So again, yeah, it's the Boseiju can hit it, those type of things, but that's fine. Like probably the most hyped card I've had in a while. The art is fantastic for any type of like dockside looping, or especially too if you have like an outlet in the command zone or something that takes advantage of that. I think this card was tailor-made for Corvold. It's fantastic. It's 2 mana. Also acts as just a reanimation spell too. So that's really nice. Yeah, I don't know. This card is a massive upgrade. Like I kicked Necromancy out of the deck so fast. which is already the worst reanimation effect in the list. The upside to something like Necromancy was its instant speed, but I can't tell you when the last time I've instant speed in Necromancy. We're not in the days where Razaketh is just laying in the graveyard or things like of that nature. There's not a Villas, a Razaketh in the graveyard. And yes, it can get things like Ranger Captain and whatnot. Those things just don't come up too often. They don't come up often enough to consider a 3-mana card versus a 2-mana card that's also a combo. So this cleans up lines. If you're on something like Orcish Bowmaster with Dockside, you only need to make 4 treasures and you're just... But what's really interesting for that is you really only need to have a creature with 4 or less to loop with the Dockside. That's what's really important. I don't even know if you need Orcish Bowmaster. Mayhem Devil seems to always be the most resilient card like in the list. Every time I'm just like, this card sucks, I'm just like, it just won me a match, you know?
Yeah.
But now this card is fantastic. I would like to see it in something like potentially like, you know, Timna Jessica, those kind of things. I just think it gives it like a better quality upgrade than just some random reanimation spell. Now, those decks typically they're gonna also be like trying to I can't even say it. World Gorger Dragoning their way through. That's a weird verbiage. I don't know. Matt, where do you see the biggest applications for this type of card?
Yeah, I mean, when I saw it, I immediately also was thinking about Corvold, but yeah, I mean, there's a lot of potential. Like Kinrith probably this is a consideration. They're also a deck that has a outlet in the zone that's reanimation centric. They have like their Fimage, Skirk Prospector kind of reanimation lines that they can do this exact same thing and then start looping with their Dockside and then pump that mana into Kinrith and win. You could also see this in Black Thrasios decks like Thrasvile. Again, kind of an upgrade for that deck. Potentially Sultai Thrasios decks. I know some of them have gotten some new tools. In general, like black, green piles, this is a consideration, especially if they have red, a little bit better. I really don't like these cards if you don't have an outlet for the most part, especially this one because it can't really function as a broken reanimation piece. Like I said, you can't really get Razaketh or Villas with it. If it makes sense in your deck, probably going to be testing it. You're already a black deck doing Dockside stuff and you got an outlet, you can do it. Seems very strong. It's really surprising to see this come into the format when we have Recurring Nightmare banned. And like I said, in a few different ways, this is a little bit of an upgrade. And this format specifically, maybe Recurring Nightmare would do more broken things in casual or whatever. But cards you want to reanimate here are just kind of broken 2-mana ones that they print for some reason.
You can proactively just play this card, right? You can just play it as early as turn 2 if you have nothing going on, just to go ahead and utilize your mana efficiently and get your energy out. And then it just sits there. It actually just kind of is like a really scary thing because it's 2 mana. It's really easy to cast. Black and a colorless enchantment. And so then you get into this weird position where Entomb becomes like a must counter card. Like you have to counter an Entomb because that Entomb resolves and this card is already on the battlefield because you have the ability to potentially just combo off like that, especially if Dockside count is 4+. That's why I really like this card a lot because it's a proactive piece, but also you just get it back with 6. So I can't get Corpse Dance back with 6. Yeah. I can get this back with 6. I can get this back with an Underworld Breach. It's what's really, really nice about this. It's 2 mana. It's really easy to cast. Pretty big fan of this card.
I guess we should briefly touch on the other Flare I think is cEDH playable. It's going to be pretty similar conversation. Flare of Denial, very simple card. Same kind of thing as Flare of Duplication. It's 1 blue though. And you can cast it for free by sacrificing a non-token blue creature, and it counters target spell. This one is kind of tough to actually say where it'll be, because there's not that many blue creatures that kind of lie around in play. Azami probably loves this, I guess, if you're out there playing Azami. None of the piles that really come to mind does this card really make sense. Your Rock Size, they run... Two blue creatures, I guess, counting Silas. Your Kinnons might run it. Nothing really above 3 colors. Blue creatures just aren't plentiful in terms of like stuff that lies around in play.
So you're telling me you don't want to go Thassa's Oracle, trigger on the stack, cast Demonic Consultation, and then sack your Thassa's Oracle?
Yeah, you do have that dream. You have that dream, but I don't want to be like, well, to keep up my counterspell, I need to cast this Oracle and to just scry. I do specifically, again, like it in Thrasios decks. If you're using Thrasios as an engine, it becomes a little bit worse. But what is Thrasios if not a way to find counterspells, right? Like in those kind of decks, if you're a Thrasios, like if you're like, oh, but I want to do Thrasios Seedborn, then use the stupid mana you untap with and cast your 3 mana counterspell. Like sometimes you can just cast the spell, but you kind of need like a cheap blue commander, I think, for it to be worth it. And there's not a lot of those, and there's not a lot of blue creatures lying around. Like I think some Kinnons, I like getting Rog Thras again. I've noticed like Spell Seekers and Trophy Mages do kind of sit around in that deck. And again, Thrasios, so you can sacrifice him, whatever. Not a lot of decks that I think want to run this though.
Yeah, I really don't have much to say about this card in terms of like cEDH, especially the decks we've been looking at and recently been talking about. They're not having a ton of blue creatures just laying around. What do you think about like the Teamer K9 decks, those type of things?
Yeah, I mean, that could be a good fit. I feel like people get kind of lost in the like, oh, but I don't want to sack the thing because then I don't have, what about my Fierce and my Swap? Like, if you don't have those cards, and you wouldn't be running this. What interaction are you going to use? Like you're basically choosing like, this is a thing you don't always want to use. But if you have a commander lying around to sacrifice, then yeah, like it's going to be worth it for some decks. Like the fact that there's a real cost associated with this cycle, I think is a cool part of it. And is why that it's like a lot more fair than some other previous free spell cycles. So yeah, K9 could be a good spot for it too. And just some new commander. There might just be something else. Like Stella Lee doesn't seem like a good fit for it because protecting your combo usually means protecting Stella Lee. Don't want to do that. The Krark decks, I don't think usually have enough blue stuff lying around. They like the Flare of Duplication though a lot. Didn't mention them. And then when we talk about Nadu, I don't know if they got the creatures lying around for that either. Speaking of Nadu, 1 green blue flying. Is that a 3/4? Jesus.
Get your rending volleys.
They make these creatures big nowadays. So flying and some of the weirdest techs we've seen on a commander recently. They're just really pushing the envelope and what they can get away with here with the templating. Nadu has the ability creatures you control have, whenever this creature becomes the target of a spell or ability, reveal the top card of your library. If it's a land card, put it onto the battlefield. Otherwise, put it into your hand. This ability triggers only twice each turn. So this is strange text, but essentially what it means is that Nadu gives this ability out. So if I have Nadu and 2 dorks in play, all of them have that ability. Whenever this creature's targeted, reveal the top card. If it's a land, put it into play. If it's not a land, put it in your hand. Broken part about this, right? Happens only twice each turn. That's still a lot. Creatures that you continue to play after that, they all have it. They all gain it. All your creatures have it. Nadu itself has it as well. Biggest thing about this card that turns it from like okay to busted potentially is the lands do not enter tapped. They just enter as is. So if you're doing, let's say like the big synergy with this deck is Shuko. If I have an early Shuko and then, I get like turn 1 dork, whatever, and then turn 2 Nadu, maybe a high roll, then I have another creature in play too. So I got 3 creatures, Shuko, Nadu, whatever. Activate Shuko on Nadu. Trigger, land into play. Activate it again. Trigger, creature into hand. Activate it again, land into play. Use my lands, cast a new creature. Start triggering the Shuko. You get to a point where it's digging you deep enough and putting enough lands into play that you're able to like keep firing in this like Simic Storm kind of ridiculousness where there's a decent amount of free enablers. The biggest ones being Shuko, Lightning Greaves, Unctus, and there might be another that's like truly free. Sylvan Safekeeper, arguably. And then there's a few that are like untap target creature, and they can hit themselves like twice and then another creature. So there's a lot of ways to do this free or cheap. And again, the fact that you're netting mana every time you hit a land is pretty ridiculous. The card also goes insane with Scoot Swarm because this isn't non-tokens. Once you start putting those lands into play with Scoot Swarm and making more Scoot Swarms, you basically win the game. Like when you get to the point where I have free targeter, Scoot Swarm is in play with 6 or more lands, you've essentially won because the odds that like once you start doubling each Scoot Swarm, you just like the number of triggers you hit just starts multiplying and you're eventually just going to vomit your deck into play. It's pretty crazy. It's very similar to Stella Lee and the mana value, the amount of ridiculous stuff it overlaps with. I think also in the way that people are approaching it, because you're going to see people build it as very like all in combo, blow up, throw up my board. And then I think where it's going to ultimately land is somewhere in between that and a more reasonable game plan that doesn't get blown out as much. But I think the upside with this card is that like Stella Lee is like a combo engine, and this thing is just like this is a true value engine. Like this is an ultra Thrasios, like Super Saiyan, Ultra Instinct, whatever Thrasios that just goes crazy in terms of value generation. There's not really even a card or commander that generates as much value, I think, as Nadu can.
Yeah, especially when you get all your pieces online. But when I look at like a deck like Nadu or even Stella Lee, what's the downside to all these decks? They're having to run these cards like Shuko.
Yeah.
It's not like you're running like Dockside Extortionist to like fire off your Nadu. Its stats are great. It's pretty easy to cast. Typically probably comes down turn 2 pretty easily. I'm curious, like, because I haven't played against it. I'm very excited to see it because of any kind of Storm deck's a good deck, right? Like that's the best kind of decks. I guess, like, are you playing like Ursa Saga to go potentially get your Shuko.
I think I saw somewhere, and
Yeah.
then it's cool that Saga stocks went up because of another card we'll talk about with Vexing Bauble. The creature enablers are usually, I think the quality on some of those is high enough to where it doesn't feel like I'm having to run them. It's like, it's just like I kind of get to or whatever. And then Lightning Greaves has its own upside. Shuko is truly just a bad card. The thing that's kind of cool with it though is the floor of like, let's say like reasonable case scenario, I don't really get a lot of my creatures for like a lot of my good enablers and cheap creatures, and I just have Nadu. Just going like Nadu and then putting Shuko on it twice, draw 2 cards, maybe put land, maybe draw a card, put a land into play, I guess on average. Like it's still pretty good. And then any creature you hit off of that lets it kind of spiral. That's what I'm talking about with the number of like enablers and things, like when they get the count right, what it'll look like. I goldfished the deck just to get a good feeling for it. And it did get to do like where it felt like I was going like turn 2, put 3 lands into play, draw 4 or 5 cards. Or like one-sided wheel where I make a bunch of mana. Like it can get really, really gross, but I don't know what the consistency is going to look like. It's another one of those synergistic decks that, like we've talked about with like a whole bunch of commanders, it feels like now, whereas like every set, you got to be on the lookout because there might be something new that just like cracks them open.
It's pretty cool. And obviously, doesn't Displacer Kitten just break this deck in half?
Yes, it's very, very good with Kitten. It's also a Simic deck that you don't really want to Bowmaster them because it triggers their Nadu. And also, they don't actually draw the card. They put it in a hand so it doesn't trigger Bowmaster.
Yeah, that's a pretty good card. It's pretty interesting. It seems kind of random to be in Modern, right? Like,
yeah. Because it looks like people are building it for Modern because it is very powerful and a lot of those enabler cards are legal.
That'd be kind of cool. I'd like to see it. I'll have to check a look at some of the Modern lists that are playing it. I mean, Modern's got Urza Saga, so
Yeah, I mean that's good enough plan over there.
What's our next card? Our final card for this video.
Yeah, we're gonna have to split this one into 2 parts, maybe even more parts, depending. But this next one is a really hot topic, and that is Vexing Bauble. 1 mana, colorless artifact. Whenever a player casts a spell, if no mana was spent to cast it, counter that spell, and it has the ability 1 tap, sacrifice Vexing Bauble, draw a card.
Seems innocent enough.
It does. It seems innocent enough for a card they're talking about restricting in Vintage. We've seen this text before, or similar text on cards, right? It's very similar to an effect like Lavinia, where free spells are shut off. This is symmetrical. It does shut off your own free spells, and note that. Don't play this and try to Force of Will something. You better be paying 5 mana for that Force of Will. But this thing is colorless, 1 mana, and you can get rid of it, sack it, cantrip off of it for 1 additional mana. It's pretty wild. We've never seen an effect like this at this rate with no pips associated to it. And the downside of, well, what if I want to start doing my thing, just not being there because you just get to get rid of it and it doesn't even cost you a card. It's pretty interesting. This was really hard for me to evaluate because where it actually lands on the proactive, reactive, whatever scale that you might want to look at the format as, it's a little hard to determine, right? Because the obvious thing is maybe I play this as a Lavinia, right? I play my stuff in TNK and I drop a Bauble and nobody can do their free spells or Rogers or Chrome Moxes and blah, blah, blah. But then the other hand is, oh, wait a minute, I play this in Rog side, dump my hand and all my rocks and wheel with a Vexing Bauble out, and then nobody can dump their stuff. It's sort of like balance in that regard is actually the comparison I'm thinking of with this card of like, you can use it fairly. You can also do like, I do the broken stuff, and then because I did that, you guys all suck now, and you can't do anything about it.
The applications are going to be really interesting where they go because, as he's mentioned, we've seen cards like Lavinia and Boromir. And Boromir for a while was like, everybody was really on that card, and that was like kind of the card. And then I don't know, people started calling it cope or it stinks, all this other stuff and whatnot. I think Boromir like occupied a space in decks like Blue Farm and stuff because it's 3 mana. That's kind of clunky for a creature that for that effect when you literally have an effect that's 2 mana, though it is like modal, you can switch it off if you really needed to. 1 mana colorless is a massive difference from either blue and a white or a white and 2. For those 2 other cards respectively. I don't know. I'm not really sure where this card lands in terms of blue decks running it because they run a lot of free stuff. They're trying to cast their counter spells for free. Where I see this card is in decks that aren't inherently blue, that are looking for that other type of like silence effect. I would say more so kind of like anything of the realm of like a defense grid or something like that. So like Rakdos decks, Corvold specifically, we do have like a few free cards. You know, we have like some 0 mana stuff here and there. So you got to be just kind of wary of that. But again, you could just pay a colorless and get rid of it. Where I like this card too is if people can't actually cast their counter spells. I mean, one colorless to shut off like Mindbreak Trap is it's pretty good, you know.
Because that one will get you a lot of times behind defense grid once they get it online. Like they'll like have the mana to pay for the defense grid cost or something. And it can really get you.
Yeah, and two, if you think about this, that this kind of card is going to cause a conversation. It's like, well, my only interaction here is Fierce Guardianship. So if I don't Fierce Guardianship this card, it doesn't really matter. So now you're going to have like a conversation. So it's going to cause a lot of people to kind of almost reveal what they have in a certain way, you know. And also too, it just doesn't get mental misstepped either. Well, it can.
It does.
Sorry,
the other stuff can.
It does.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm testing Corvold. I really like it a lot just because one colors to lead on a turn. I'm basically utilizing it as veil, like a veil like effect. Because while veil can protect your things against like, you know, blue and black and all this other stuff, there's really not like a ton of interaction cards that like they don't stop like Swords to Plowshares or anything like that. Neither does this card. So I'm not really too much worried about like what it can't stop. But I'm thinking about the cards that obviously impact me the most are obviously going to be like Force of Will, Fierce Guardianship, Force Negation, Mindbreak Trap, potentially Mental Misstep. Pretty sure I'm forgetting some Deflecting Swat.
Sometimes Deadly Relic, I guess, comes up for your deck.
Yeah, absolutely. Deadly Relic for sure. For a proactive deck that doesn't have access to silence or blue, I think this card's probably a really good option. I mean, it's such a low investment to like 1 mana to lead off on your turn is just so nice.
It can be a card that you don't have to like, I run it in my deck for doing this, and then that's the only thing you do with it, right? Because you can do both of the modes on it, right? You could do, I run it in Corvold, I power out some stuff, and I just end on this, and you guys can't power anything out because I used it on turn 1 or 2, or, you know, I'm going first or second, and I just stop you guys. Or you can do, like you said, you just, during your storm turn, you see that you got the mana for it, you want to start to go for it, you know, you got the colorless lying around, whatever, use it. Basically, you know, worst case scenario, use it like a duress, eat up somebody's Fierce Guardianship or something, and then keep going. Or best case scenario, you've locked out all their free interaction. And then if you get to a point where you have to start looping, you just sack it, draw 2 cards off Corvold, which is pretty hot. It's hard to evaluate kind of because it is really flexible and it can be used in a lot of different ways and is probably just pretty powerful.
Also, cool little interaction. If you're worried about it shutting off your free rocks, but you want to leave it in play for whatever reason, once you cast it, just cast your Veil of Summer.
Yes, the anti-Chalice of the Void tech, basically.
Yeah, just do that, and then you can just cast all your free spells no matter what. So.
Yep, it's pretty cool. This is probably the one I'm most interested to see because I could see like in the whatever when we cover this like 6 months later, where it could be like, okay, we're all running Vexing Bauble, or like 1 or 2 decks are running it.
Yeah, and we're gonna get a lot of data. So unlike where Lord of the Rings dropped last year, it was more so like the first tournaments were kind of on the tail end of the year. We're gonna immediately get next week several larger size tournaments, 64 plus events with this set legal. And then I'm sure there's going to be some the weekend following. Sure enough, we're going to be basically almost at the end of the month, and we're going to be right at Cowtown. So we're going to have like 3 strict back-to-back weekends of tournament play with these cards. So whether they are good, bad, indifferent, I'm still trying to find out, you know, what's going on. Were we completely wrong about some cards? Are they just okay? Flare Denial sucks. You know, I'm just okay.
But I think that's going to do it for part 1 of, I don't even want to say a 2-part series because it could be 3. We might do this, another preview episode coming out next week, and then maybe sort of the mid view, not even like a post review of just like how things are playing out after the first week of us playing with these cards in tournament, and still really going over it because that's kind of going to be what the hot topics are going forward. It's not like the set comes out and we suddenly all know exactly where all these cards go, right? And exactly how good they are. It's going to take some testing. It's going to take a few months before people really land on things, and then people have to adjust to how those people have changed their decks and stuff like that. So a whole lot to cover with MH3. Huge impact on this format. But stay tuned. If we didn't mention a card you're looking forward to hearing us talk about, let us know down below. We'll make sure to get it next time. All that being said, thank you so much for watching. Thank you for listening. And as always, go play cEDH. Have a good one, everybody.